So this session is all about how we consolidate the work we've done so far. It's going to give you some tips about what we expect you to do. Okay, and we'll see it's probably about a week's worth of work in total. So this is where we start. You need to know what you need to know. Our specification in terms of the Constitution tells you what the concepts and the terminology you need to know are, gives you some context, and it gives you some idea of the type of questions you might get asked. So I'm going to take those piece by piece and how we can actually prep those effectively. So let's start up here with concepts and terminology. I think there's some options about how you can go about consolidating it. Obviously, one of the options is flashcards, where you put one concept on one side of the card and the definition and the example on the other, or a constitutional reform on one side of the card and when and what impact it had on the other. Another method would be create a revision table. I'm going to show an example of that. And also, depending what you prefer, you could practice suggested 9-mark questions. I'm going to show you what they are because they will give you a bit of an understanding of how you put those ideas together effectively. So let's have a look at this. Here's a table. Here are the key concepts we need to know down here. And in green, we have some of the potential 9-mark questions. So you can see here, these 4 areas link to this question. Explain and analyse the 3 sources of the UK Constitution. Then you're talking about the principles, parliamentary sovereignty, the rule of law, royal prerogative, which could exist within the sources too. And then finally, 3 ways in which rights are protected in the UK. So we're talking obviously there about the Supreme Court, the role of Parliament, the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, how does this look? Well, if I was doing this table, it looks something like that. So if I was discussing statute law, written source, agreed and passed by Parliament, hold precedence over the other sources with the examples. Parliament Act 1911 being one, you could put more than one on that. And again, if you're thinking about flashcards, this on one side, this on the other. Okay? So your challenge would be to do all the key terms and concepts on the flashcards are in this table. In terms of recent reforms, these are the areas that have been reformed pretty much since 1997. And it's important that you know when these happened and what was the impact of them. So if I was to take the example of civil liberties down here, what I'd be putting in this table would be the Human Rights Act of 1998, incorporated the European Convention of Human Rights into British law. The P and the C stand for pros and cons. So one pro is it led to a growth of judicial review cases by the UK Supreme Court. We've been talking about that. A con would be it's not totally enshrined like the US Bill of Rights, meaning that this Human Rights Act can actually be repealed by Parliament if it wants to through statute of law. Okay, that's what I'm looking for, and I think that's what you need, okay, in terms of each of these particular reforms. And that's your basic knowledge that you require to get through the Constitution. Now we move into the area of the 25-mark questions, or the potential 25-mark questions, and the areas they will be looking at. I've suggested 3, as you can see, which kind of link to these. Requirement for a codified constitution in the UK, the fact that reforms have been inadequate, or that our rights are not purely and very well protected. And there's various ways in which, again, I think you can do this. First of all, use the waggles. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to email you some waggles which are linked to these particular questions. They aren't the questions, but they're questions very similar to them. And what you can do is you can adapt the information and the style for the benefits of doing this exercise. Let's think about flashcards. Point on one side, exclamation point, and examples on the other. Or look at my preparation tables and develop those effectively. I'll show you how that's done in a second. And what I would argue is it's well worth to practice one of the paragraphs with all the components under time pressure. So you'll be arguing in favor of one side and then challenging on the other. The benefits of that obviously is you're learning to cope under 8-minute pressure. I'll show you a template of that later. So first of all, the table. So if we take this question, it requires a written codified constitution. These are the points in favor of that. I've picked out 3. First one being recent reforms have been incoherent. The counter to that point, of course, is that gradual reform in the UK is more appropriate because it suits modern needs. You don't do all your reforms at once, you develop as society changes. Another point would be the Constitution lacks effective checks on the government, although the argument would be those checks are increasingly there through the media, through the Supreme Court, through a more aggressive Parliament. Or individual rights aren't enshrined, but as we know, you could certainly argue that there's been a significant growth in rights protection. So you can see where the arguments are. If I was doing this on the table, I'd be putting in points like this. How incoherence is shown through Brexit, how it's shown through the fact that the composition of the House of Lords continues to be a debate, how it shows through the devolution powers are fairly inconsistent and have been shown to be difficult, and certainly in the most recent crisis. Okay, this could also be a flashcard with a point and this on the back of it. If you're then going to put it together into a paragraph, here's your structure. Point, explanation, analysis of that point, counterpoint, explanation, analysis of that, and then crucially your evaluation overall. How incoherent are you believing the Constitution to be, and whether or not a written and codified Constitution would bring a greater level of clarity. That's more of a challenge, but I think at least if you do one of those, you're certainly drawing and trying to make sense of the work or the preparational work you've done. And you'll learn about making those connections and how you write that. Giving you some stems here to help you. Same with this question. Recent reforms have been inadequate. Got the points in favour. Devolution, House of Lords, controlled by the executive, versus devolution works. The Lords is better now than it was. And obviously we're protecting rights more effectively. You can see that the information is fairly similar. It's just been reordered. And again, you can do it as I've shown before in terms of filling in the table, or you can do flashcards. These are the waggles at the bottom here, which will help you with it. Again, a template of how you would do that if you're going to write a practice paragraph. And then finally, this question, rights are poorly protected in the UK. Again, the arguments which would support that about how the executive controls, how Parliament is more worried about national security, how leaving the EU will actually diminish our rights, versus the role of the Supreme Court emerging and being stronger, how Parliament can still protect rights. And think about the House of Lords and how they have a role to play in certain legislation. And also the fact that we remain within the European Convention of Human Rights, and we have adopted many of the EU regulations anyway. That's a more challenging essay, I would argue, but again, it's worth practicing paragraphs here. Okay, here's a template. You'll get this PowerPoint. So, why is this all important? Well, I think at this stage, by doing this consolidation, it'll start to make the jigsaw a little bit clearer. At the start of the year, I talked about how politics was a large jigsaw, and as the pieces go in, it becomes a much more clearer picture. I think by consolidating it, you'll be able to see links that you wouldn't have had at the start. Secondly, you're creating resources which are going to be helpful for your revision next year. And finally, we're going to move on to US. And if we're doing the US system, we have to do comparisons with the UK. So by going through this process, we're setting the context for all those comparisons. All right, I hope that made sense. Work on this next week, and we'll talk in our tutorials. Thank you.